So welcome everybody. Good to see you today. I'm Rhonda Boyle, your SOAR online community leader, and we are here to bring you calls that inform and empower you to move forward in your life through strengths-based talent development. And today we are here to talk about communication issues that information tech teams may be having, and also those that IT professionals may be having as well. So we're going to be talking about challenges today and solutions with our expert panel. Let me introduce you first to Bob Kanter. He founded Kanter Consulting Group in 2010, and he works with IT managers and teams to get projects done faster and at a lower cost with less risk. Say hello, Bob Kanter.
Hey, y'all. How is everyone?
Says the New Yorker using y'all. I love it. So let's move on. We'll be back to you in a minute, Bob. And I want to introduce you next to Cindy Butts. She's the founder of Grow with Strengths Coaching, and she works with IT teams, weaving strengths into the onboarding, performance systems, and meetings and so forth. Good to see you today, Cindy.
Hi from Rhode Island, everyone.
There you go. And next, let me introduce you to Marcia Buzella. She is a coach and consultant, and I should change that to Dr. Marcia Buzella. She is a coach and consultant from Orlando, Florida, and has over 20 years in IT management and quality assurance. Good to see you, Marcia.
Nice to see you too, Rhonda. Greetings from the Sunshine State.
Thank you. And we have with us also Wendy Van Ryn. She is a business strategist from Gilbert, Arizona, working with techie people and creatives. Good to see you, Wendy.
Hi, thank you, Rhonda. Hello.
Good. All right, so I'm going to mute everybody out here because I want to make sure that we don't have... here we go. Good. So here's a question. Here's how I want to get started today. Do we have communication issues on these IT teams or in the industry? Bob Kanter, we'll turn it over to you to start, sir.
Okay, well, I think the obvious answer is no. IT people are great communicators.
So says an IT professional.
I've been living in New Orleans for over a year. I can say y'all.
Yes,
so yes, we all know, for those of us who are IT professionals, we know that that's not our strong suit. In fact, I work closely with the CIO Executive Council, which is part of CIO.com. And a couple of years ago, they surveyed several hundred CIOs. And one of the questions was, how many of you are very satisfied with the communication skills within your IT organization? 96% of the CIOs responded that they were not very satisfied. So do the math.
Wow.
What percent of CIOs said they were very satisfied with the staff's communication skills? So I'd say, yes, that indicates we have a problem, and we all in the industry know that we're not real good at that.
Exactly. True story. Cindy, weigh in here on your experience. I know that you work a lot with IT professionals, and tell us what you know or how you feel about these communication issues. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. All righty. So yes, it's challenging for a lot of IT people. They have so many different people that they need to communicate effectively with and to solve problems for. So that's super challenging. And many of them don't have, they didn't have a lot of professional development training. They just don't think about, how do you communicate effectively? Many of them are actually incredibly precise and great communicators one-on-one. And in bigger groups, it gets to be a little bit trickier. So there's a lot of opportunity, and with some coaching and team development, things can change really quickly and become much more effective for them and less stressful for them at work too.
Sure, which is what we really want, right?
Yeah.
So here's what I want to ask Wendy Van Ryn, we've had a conversation about this, I know. They have communication, and a lot of the professionals in that industry, they're really talking a lot in their heads though, aren't they? Hold on, you're muted.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, what is interesting is a lot of times, they're prioritizing their tasks and what they have to do. And so it becomes a matter of what's most important in this moment. That's what I'm focused on. And because all of the people I've worked with in development and that arena, they really have such a passion for what they do and being perfect at what they do, that sort of becomes their priority in their day-to-day and their focus. So yes.
Yeah. But that internal conversation, right, Marcia, it's all going on inside. And a lot of times they're introverted. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Introverted is pretty much the name of the game when it comes to some of us in the IT field, myself included. You have to find that on switch and figure out how to best put yourself out there, sometimes to say something uncomfortable. That thing that's going around in your head, you have to get it out into the wilderness so that it can be evaluated as a possibility as you go forward. Because until you voice it, you might be the one with the brilliant idea. It doesn't exist until it's out there.
Right.
And in my research, 90% of projects fail. And one of the number one reasons, communication. And
yeah, lots riding on this, right?
Absolutely.
That we find solutions to this. I want to run back up to Bob Kanter for a minute, and because he has a story that he wants to share about this. Fill us in.
Yeah, this idea about IT people being so much in our heads, and I say our because I'm a 30-year IT person as well. I was coaching someone this morning, and he was getting ready for a big management team meeting where there was going to be lots of contention. And he was so stuck up here. He was over preparing. And I said to him, I'm going to make up a name, Sam, you've got this down cold. You've done all your homework. You've worked with these people before. What's most important is for you to get out of this and into the room and really engage with those people. Even as introverts, we can engage with people. We can listen, we can ask questions. We don't necessarily have to be the life of the party.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the issues may be that a lot of the people that they're working with, which would be those people, are making a lot of assumptions. We make a lot of assumptions about you, Bob. Isn't that true? And that kind of, Wendy, I want you to talk about this because I think something that problems too.
Hold on, you froze. Could you repeat that again?
Yeah. I'm saying that the challenges that they have we often cause them because we make a lot of assumptions.
Well, it's interesting because I've worked on the consulting side in the tech and creative industry for a long, long time. And I didn't really realize until I became a coach and I started coaching a lot of these people that even I had sort of stereotyped them. And I have a lot of people that I know personally and in my family who are also in that industry. And you don't really think about your own blind spots and, taking the time to actually get to know who it is you're working with or who you're coaching. What's fascinating is, I think that there's this perception that they don't have something to say by those of us who are talkers, me included. And yet you unlock their talents or you start figuring out who they are and they will talk your ear off. So I love that because it's important that we listen and we hear who they are and what they have to offer because it can be far exceeding what we would ever come up with ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cindy, you work a lot one-on-one with IT professionals in particular, in addition to teams. So is that true that they talk just like nonstop when they finally get to know you and understand how you operate and that kind of thing?
Well, often, like Wendy was saying, one-on-one, super, super comfortable. I have someone that I worked with recently that was struggling with, in meetings, she was being asked to give feedback like very spontaneously. So they would have a meeting and they'd say, what do you think? And so when I was working with her, she was saying, this is stressing me out because I'm not really sure what I think right now. She really needed time to think it through and kind of digest and process everything that was coming at her.
Mm-hmm.
So after coaching, we kind of came up with a way for her to say to the team in meetings, like in real time, to say, I love this information, these ideas. Can I think about that overnight? And I'll come back to you tomorrow with some insights. And kind of having permission to say, like, let me think about this. So it really reduced her stress and added to the team, because it kind of slowed the team down a little bit so that they all were a little more thoughtful. And it's interesting. She became like a really great, I guess, sounding board is a good way to term it, because people realized she was very thoughtful and they could go to her and she'd kind of ruminate on it and then come back quickly, like not wait weeks and weeks, but maybe the next day, which was plenty of time. So just an example, I guess, of it made me think when you were talking about the kind of all those conversations that are going on in their heads.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and what you're talking about here is that she's being proactive.
Right.
She's clearly stating what she needs. Would her team ever want her to not have that if they understand about her that is those are better working conditions for her to put the pause in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Helpful for the team to know.
They grew to appreciate her.
Exactly. And they respected that. And then over a very short period of time realized, and they'd say, let's say her name was Mary. They'd say, Mary needs to think about this. And they'd all sort of tease and giggle. And Mary would say, like, I do, I'm listening. And instead of the team before, I think, thought that Mary wasn't even paying attention because she's thinking so deeply that you can't really see it on her face.
Right.
So they learned a lot about each other's styles.
Exactly. That's so important. So they can understand, how to that's a really clear way of communicating with the team, is learning how to express your needs, I think, too. So let's go back to this conversation, going on in the head, because a lot of times they can't even complete a thought. Marcia, what are we doing? We're yapping. That's what we're doing. We're interrupting them.
Well, Cindy mentioned it earlier. She talked about not spending our professional development time on those social skills like communication. We're techie people. We like the cool new toys and the things that are out there being developed and added into the workplace. We don't always think about those soft skill trainings. And we have an opportunity to get some practice in play because we don't know what our communication style is necessarily until we've taken the time to start unpacking that and figure out what it looks like. For example, if you're a person that's extremely vocal, are you saying the right things in the moment? I had a gentleman who could talk and talk, had no problem talking. But at the end of the day, nobody knew what he said or remembered key pieces of it because it was so scattered and all over the board. Coaching him to really focus in on what's the message you're trying to get, how does it work with the goals the team is dealing with at that particular moment, and if you have options, maybe number system, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versus something that sounds like one big huge option, and having the opportunity to practice and solicit some feedback to figure out what are your teammates hearing, what is your coworker hearing as they hear you talk through all these pieces. Are you saying too much but not enough?
Wow. Those are great questions that they need to kind of, all people really need to kind of understand that about themselves, Bob Kanter, fill us in.
I think that's such an important point. So often when we think about communicating, we're thinking about what we want to say, and it's so much more about starting with where is the other person, whether it's an individual one-on-one or a bunch of individuals in a meeting. If we start with what do we want these people to take away from the conversation. What do we want them to know? What do we want them to do? What do we want them to believe? Then think through, where are they today? What's the gap? And then we can tailor our communication or our messaging to fill in that gap. We can be so much more effective.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like planning to me. A little
planning and awareness.
Mm-hmm. Right. So absolutely self-awareness, and also being able to have an opportunity to kind of stop some of those intrusions, you know, and finding a way to be able to do that. Wouldn't you say?
Well, and yeah, focus. So I sometimes, I've got this thing I call this leadership life cycle. And the first step is always to clarify your strategic intent. And if you lose sight of your strategic intent, your mind is going to wander, your words are going to wander, your thoughts are going to wander. So you've got to keep coming back to that. It's
a way of coping and really staying focused, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And keeping the other people around you focused.
There's a flip side to that too, because Bob mentioned, what do you want them to know? What do you need to know from them in that moment as well? Because you have to have that two-way communication to help keep the goals aligned and make sure that everybody's firing on all cylinders.
It really does take this whole understanding of everybody's place on the team and how everybody functions on the team. And that takes some time and coaching, I think, for sure. So let me let me go to you, Cindy, for a second, because I want to kind of talk about staying ahead of the curve, because this is a pressure that they feel. As Marcia said a few minutes ago, that being a techie person, you love to be, you know, into the toys and the new shiny pennies, but there can also be a lot of pressure with that. Is that true?
Yes, that is definitely true. There's so much to learn, and they're trying to figure out what languages you learn, what's relevant now, what's going to be helpful to spend their time in for the future. Mm-hmm. And the future might be only 8 months from now. So there's so much to learn. And also then how all of those, that new learning kind of integrates with the systems that they're using now. You know, most are building a platform or doing something that's going to help their customer service team or their sales team or their account management team, and keeping abreast of all of that as well, where the company's, you know, moving forward. One team I worked with recently, it was interesting. They kind of flipped the question and said, they talked about readiness and learning. They were overwhelmed with learning and everything they needed to learn. And we in coaching talked about, like, what do you need to be ready for? And it sounds like a very subtle change, but it resonated with them, and they kind of put a plan together for different people to learn different things, kind of divide and conquer. But they also realized that they actually love learning. So while some teams that may be stressful, they were kind of excited about the fact that they were assigning each other, they were collaborating, and kind of made a plan for overall learning, and then sharing that learning with each other. Because as we know, we really learn when we can teach each other. So wow. It was really interesting, and it just started with the kind of readiness and changing the way they looked at learning, instead of being a chore, being an opportunity.
Well, and what it sounds like to me that you did was you allowed them to prioritize their learning in order to get ready mm-hmm. for what they knew their expertise was, and so forth. And I love that sharing of information. Marcia, how do you see that as not this knowledge sharing? Are there problems around that? And if so, how can we solve that? I think Cindy has a great solution. What have you seen on that?
There are definitely problems with knowledge sharing, and they can be across the board. It can be an issue of not enough time to share the proper information. It can be a misalignment of goals. The other one that tends to come into play a little bit is when the idea of having your job on the line comes into play. If I release this nugget of knowledge out into the world, what does that do to me from my career perspective, and how would I have to change? And we don't like change necessarily, all people, so that gets a little bit touchy. So people will hold on to information, and then others won't know that there's pieces of information missing, which makes it really difficult to deliver a project that is built for a community to use, or for a community solution, because you don't have all the players weighing in appropriately. And one of the other key things about knowledge sharing is it's one of the predications for trust. If you trust someone, you will share knowledge with them, and you can build their trust by giving information as well. So it becomes a two-way street that's really important to maintain.
Mm-hmm. And so is it just a matter of building those relationships or slowing down that communication? Help us understand that.
It could be slowing down, but it could be just getting into what really is relevant in that moment. Mm-hmm. You can tell me 500 times about XYZ project that went bad because of. Are we doing that right now? Are we at the risk of doing that right now? What is it that we're focusing on today? Did I do something that made you think I'm planning on going back and doing what I know you've told me about? And sometimes the repetition can cause issues with the knowledge sharing because you share the same thing. Mm-hmm. Are they sharing it because the message isn't received? Or is there something underpinning that and it needs to be explored further? A lot of times when you come to the exploration steps, we avoid that because those can be difficult conversations, things that we don't necessarily want to tread into. They can take more time, and time is something we don't always have. Mm-hmm. So it can be challenging to do that, but it's worth it because when you get in there and you find out, what is Marcia afraid of and how can she share with Bob what that is, it really does work and helps you to become a team instead of individuals trying to hopefully get the rails to meet at the same place.
Wow. Yeah. I can see how that can be a really big issue. And, I want to go back. I want to hear from you in just a second, Wendy, because I have a question for you, but I want to touch on what you mentioned, we've talked about before, Bob, and that is having difficult conversations, because that's what Marcia is talking about. Can we have your thoughts on that?
Yeah, those
are really hard.
Most people in IT, when they use the term difficult conversations, are talking about performance management. But okay. As Marcia pointed out, there are lots of different kinds of conversations. And not only is it important to think about knowledge sharing in the context of the moment, it's also important to think of it in the context of who each individual is. So we all are at different points in our professional development. There are junior members of the team, senior members of the team. I was recently having this conversation with my adult son, who is a junior software engineer. He's into year 2 in his job. And he's been trying to learn this new product that they're asking him to support. And when he works with one of the other junior software engineers who's a little bit ahead of him, he learns a lot because that individual knows how to relate to his level of knowledge and lack of knowledge. When he does the same kind of work with one of their senior developers, he learns almost nothing because that senior developer is moving so fast and not relating to what my son's level of knowledge and expertise is. He's talking way over his head. Now, back to your question about difficult conversations. So here's this guy who's in year 2 of his job, still relatively young, and he's uncomfortable turning around to a senior developer who's also doing his performance reviews and saying, whoa, you're going way too fast. You're telling me things that don't make any sense to me. And as we've talked about that, I've suggested to him that he make it more about himself rather than the other individual. And he bring it back and say, I know that you're doing your best to share all your knowledge with me, but I'm feeling confused right now. Would it be possible for us to slow this down a little bit? Would it be possible for me to ask you some questions? And by making it more about him and the moment, it can make it an easier conversation.
Mm-hmm. And, that really kind of is in alignment with what Cindy was talking about earlier, where he stepped in and told what he needed. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times people don't really know what they need Wendy, I'm going to have you tune in on this. Would you say that's true? People just kind of like don't even know, they're just dealing with whatever it is?
Yeah, I think because of the nature of the industry and the work and the realities of expectations and deadlines and launches, etc., that the personal relational aspects get lost. And it really is important for people to know how to advocate for themselves. But that's really where coaching is so helpful, because then people actually can have language and words to identify those things for themselves. But it's also really important for the team lead or the manager, owner, etc., to actually extend that effort and get to know who their people are and how they want to be communicated with, and what they value, what matters to them. Mm-hmm. So it is something that requires effort, and yet if you do it, you'll reap rewards from that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know for sure that it's worth the work and the investment of time and energy and so forth. And, here's why it's important, because wouldn't you say that a lot of IT professionals feel, or let me rephrase, by nature of their business and the industry, they tend to be isolated, which I think might even make these conversations even more difficult. What do you think, Wendy?
I would say that is another thing that is generally, I would say, understood about people in that industry. But I find that a lot of them, they like their space and their privacy, and let me do my work. Right. Let's connect here and there, but leave me alone. I want to do, my job and my work. So I think it's something that again, it goes back to really understanding the individual and what that means for them, and how mm-hmm. much of that is really true. Or, surprisingly, I worked with an agency where the founder, who was also the primary sales driver of the company, he died overnight. And there was someone who stepped into his role from his very technical background, and he did an amazing job. And so he went from back in, a certain space into the forefront. And so I think, again, it really comes down to actually understanding those things about that person that make them an individual, make them unique. The talents that really underlie their technical skills, because there's something underneath there.
Mm-hmm. Bob Kanter, tell us your perspective there, sir.
Yeah, I think that times are changing rapidly, and so many of our folks do want to just be left alone to do their work, but they can't work in isolation anymore. Mm-hmm. With Agile and with sprints, we're now dealing with cross-functional teams. We're taking more of a product management perspective than a project management perspective. And doing that means being very engaged, not only with the rest of your team, but across teams as well. So going back to our opening statistic, only 4% of CIOs felt that their IT people were good communicators. Communication and the ability to engage with others and become less than isolated is becoming not only a critical success factor, but one of the most critical success factors.
So how do they get their work done if they work best in quiet and without disruption? Cindy, fill us in.
Well, this is kind of a...
It sounds like a catch-22 to me.
Yeah, but maybe a sideways answer. So addressing the isolation, IT teams are actually, they might feel isolated, but a lot of them are in the same room, working with headset, like a headset, right? And working very quietly and using the chat function to talk when they're like back to back, right? So there's like 10 people in a room and they're like buzzing away on the chat function. And so a few groups that I've worked with and so that's not ideal, right? I mean, it's they are communicating, but they're communicating through little sound bites, and there's a lot that can be misunderstood. And as we know, tone doesn't come into effect, and that's not really collaboration, but it's what a lot of people do. But I'm a huge fan of the Daily Huddle, and I have found that kind of a solution for that open office environment. And this is one solution, there's lots of solutions, but for that open office environment where you can actually feel isolated, but you're still surrounded by lots of people. But that daily huddle, maybe 10 to 15 minutes every morning, they know what the priorities are, they know what the resources are, they know what people are challenged with, just saves so much time and energy, and actually does address the topic that we started down this road with around isolation, and of course improves overall communication. But it's kind of a funny thing to think that, you have open office environments and people feeling isolated, but I've found that the daily huddle is a great solution for kind of both of those things.
I can see where they would feel that, though, because they have this need to be able to like hunker down and get it done. And so this is why they're trying to avoid the distractions. Is that what's going on? Wendy, fill us in.
Oh yeah, I know people who, not going to say names, stream Netflix while they're doing, and it's not a factor. It's more about what they're getting done. And so, and I do think too, that we kind of have to categorize what we're talking about with communication, where we have project and product management, that communication as far as the tasks and the strategic things that we're trying to get done day to day, versus the things that help people understand more about who they are interrelationally and why they're there and their mission and their purpose. So I think that we can even kind of differentiate those two different nuances of communication too. But
sure. I mean, you're talking about the interpersonal communication and then the workflow communication.
right.
I can kind of see where the difference is going. And, I think you're absolutely right, Bob, when you're talking about, teams being agile and cross functioning and all of this type of thing, and how it's become absolutely necessary that the IT professional, and that they're all that they're all in here hanging out together trying to do their pieces because they're working so closely together. Is that how I'm understanding it? Marcia, tell me what you have some input on this.
One of the things to note about Agile and the whole collaborative environment is in the IT space, and especially with my background being software quality assurance, being at the end of the life cycle, it was always challenging because, you're the last hurdle or the last step before going to production. And there is a blame game that goes on when things don't go right. Who caused it to go wrong? What happened? And there's always these, reassessments, how it happened. But what I like about Agile is we try to eliminate that. We try to have a team spirit type approach. And when we talked about tone earlier, one of the ways to help with those communications is having a positive and forward-looking tone. And if you're dwelling too much on the blame or the past, or what so-and-so could have done better if he wasn't watching Netflix while he was trying to code or test, you can have a better conversation and some better progress in the future. So, having that perspective in a daily huddle, getting that feedback, if you're the one leading it or if you're getting a lot of airtime, ask somebody afterwards, was that on point? Did it fit with the conversation? Get some feedback for yourself. Don't wait for a performance review when your manager says you didn't talk enough or you talked too much. Find out in the moment as well.
Wow, that's great advice. A lot of us could use, Marcia. Let me change topics here for just a second. I want to ask this question, then I want to hit a couple of you. Wendy, let's start with you. Let's talk about burnout. What causes it? How it happens? How do these professionals wind up in this state? And what does it look like? And then how do we get out of it? That's what I want to talk about.
Oh gosh, that's a big one. Burnout. There's so many things that can really contribute to a person individually experiencing burnout. Again, I hate to hammer the same thing over and over, but I think a lot of it really is, in that day-to-day of the management and the task and the project. I've seen, this is a really strange thing that I've witnessed, but success has actually been a driver of burnout because, oh, something went really well. And then the client or whoever's in charge is, we're going to add this project on, we're going to add this project on, and we're going to have the same results and same time frame and same launch. Everything's going to go. So there's almost like this expectation that the same thing's going to repeat exactly the same way. And it can be a driver of burnout just in and of itself. I think too, having just appropriate buffers and boundaries in place where you have appropriate downtimes or breaks in between projects where, yes, there's always these tasks that have to get done and everything, but I guess it really goes back to, I hate to even hammer the same thing again, but understanding individually what people need so that they aren't, because people are burned out on an individual level often. So really having those conversations to understand who your people are, what they value in their life and in their work. They will go above and beyond. I mean, I have yet to have seen anyone who didn't go above and beyond in their specific role, but everyone has a point at which they're done. And a burnout can happen because of how they're treated, you know, how they're talked to, like, you know, we were just talking about having too much, the project manager or whoever's leading the development of the product, not scheduling things out appropriately. And that's a whole nother conversation too, because how that's driven is, you know, there's something more foundational to that too. So
I can see how it's very customized. You know, each person clearly will have a different thing that would, you know, cause this thing called burnout, which, by the way, you guys know the World Health Organization has actually identified as a thing. Bob Kanter, let's hear your take on burnout, sir.
Well, I think burnout is really exacerbated by poor communication. When we are not doing an adequate job of setting clear expectations of one another, whether I'm managing down into my organization to the individual contributors, or the individual contributors are trying to request help or send information back up the chain of command. When we miss those handoffs, or people go off in the wrong direction, and then we either under-deliver or we deliver the wrong thing, everyone gets frustrated, and that frustration just creates the higher likelihood that people are going to feel burned out. And if it goes on for more than a couple of days or a couple of weeks, symptoms develop.
Yeah, it can be a disaster. So I know what can cause them to burn out. Meetings, Bob. That's what causes burnout, right?
Meetings, damn meetings.
Let's
Actually,
talk about meetings a second.
It's not meetings. It's not meetings. It's
what is it?
It's poorly run meetings.
Poorly run meetings. Yeah, Marcia's over there nodding her head. Marcia, talk to us about meetings, how much you love meetings.
Meetings can be great, but if it's a bunch of talking heads for a couple of hours and nobody's sure what you're supposed to do when you leave the room, it's a waste of time. So many leaders will go into a session expecting somebody else to run it, or they'll have a poor agenda lined up, or, oh my gosh, the projector didn't work, or did we talk to the people that are on the phones? Did we remember to ask them the questions? I had a lady who was on the phone and they always forgot to ask for her opinion. And she was a brilliant software engineer. She knew all these different things, but in the moment they would make a decision to go with somebody else's idea because nobody would pause loud enough for the Polycom to actually pick her up while she's going, wait. No one would hear that. So getting her an opportunity to have her voice heard in those types of meetings helped transform it, at least for her, and then ultimately for her team, into something that is valuable. So if the meeting is on point, valuable. If it's just a bunch of people in a room, I'll pass.
I think that you speak for people other than just IT professionals. I think we're all on that. Cindy, you have some experience too around this with meetings being just called in. And I think it's one of those distractions that teams, and particularly I'm looking focused on the individual professional on the team.
Right. Yeah, I was just thinking when Marcia was talking, I was thinking there's someone that I've been working with recently that is, he's really thoughtful, and he's not one that will blurt anything out in a meeting, but you can just see the wheels turning. And over time, we've been working on him asking. He has great questions, and he kind of has great questions to figure out what the root cause is, to get to the truth. He's very calm, very approachable, and didn't have a lot of confidence in asking those questions a while ago. And now we've been working on, like, what's the entry point? So you're in that meeting and there's all this stuff going on and there's a lull. And then, like, how do you jump in so it doesn't feel awkward and weird? And he's got these, like, amazing questions. And so it's really been exciting to watch him use his, like, amazing sense of asking the right questions for the team to stay on track, for the meeting to stay on track, to redirect. And now the team actually will say sometimes, you know, aren't you going to ask your questions? Aren't you going to jump in? So he's kind of shifted the energy, which makes me so happy and kind of excited for him and his team. And he does it in a lot of areas, but one specific area we're talking about meetings is he's able to step forward in a very different way for his team and add value, just because he's amazing at he asks the questions that some people might be thinking of, but he asks the, you know, deeper questions to get to the point.
So what he's done, I see, is he has understood his own influence. And now he's starting to move forward in, you know, understanding his presence on the team, you know, and where he belongs and his part in it, which I think is super critical. Wendy, don't you think it's that belongingness and knowing where you fit? Do you think?
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, there's also, I mean, I think we could have a conversation too about people that have remote teams and what that is like for them. I mean, I know a gal I talked to who she has a cubicle, she has a presence, but she's remote. And so even how she's able to communicate is, and feel a part of that group it's not the same as everyone else in the organization. And, you know, really, I think that it's really incumbent upon the team lead or, you know, whoever is running that particular group or managing that particular group to really help their people engage in those conversations. I think that's what makes a really great leader, is someone that can see those individual talents and bring them out. One of the guys I coached, he was the youngest person in the organization. He was like I think mid to late 20s. And one of his fascinating talents had his entire financial future planned for, paid for, financed. I mean, this guy, he started investing as a kid, just something he was interested in, really driven by. And some of the decisions that within the transitions that this agency was going through, they were having to make some key decisions, and they were small enough that I said, you know, if you brought him into the conversation just to listen, just to be part of it, just to ask you questions, just to challenge even some of what you're thinking, not that you would have to take technical advice or whatever, but just to bring him into that conversation, what that meant for him and what that meant for them. So yeah, but it has to come from the leaders, really.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you know, you're calling them to be more vulnerable so that they can, you know, fully integrate their people into and tap into that undeveloped talent which is out there, which we know everybody has. So really fascinating. So here's what I want to do. I want to hear, because we're about ready to start wrapping up here, but I want to hear a success story, what you consider your favorite all-time working with a team or a professional, and how they, you know, what you saw in that transformation. Who's up first? Who wants up?
I'll jump in.
You are unmuted, sir.
Okay. So one of my favorite stories, working within a global financial services organization with a fairly senior level management team. 4 men, 1 woman. Each one of the men were triple type A personalities, and these were big guys, physically, loud, big. And this woman was about, I don't know, I don't think she tipped the scales at much over 100 pounds. I don't think she was 5 feet tall. And she had a very quiet demeanor. And she came into our coaching conversations with, how do I compete and be one of those guys? And what we explored with her was, you don't try to play their game, you try to figure out your game. And several of us have just talked about the power of good questions and how to enter conversations. And the space she made for herself was to ask conversations of these guys who are always out there and in each other's faces. And within the space of about 2 or 3 months of our coaching, she emerged as the de facto team leader amongst the equals, because they were always doing this. They couldn't hear each other. They didn't listen to each other. They weren't asking each other constructive questions. She came in from the perspective of, how do I enable this very high-performing, high-powered team to be a high-performance team? And by seeing that as her role and using questions to engage them in more effective conversations, she was able to help them achieve much more than they had been achieving before.
What an amazing story. I just think, wow, what an impact coaching can make on a team when you hear something like that, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that. Marcia, how about you?
My story revolves around the power of saying no and realizing when it's appropriate to say no. When it's an IT project, you don't want to tell a customer no. You don't want to be the person that stops the freight train from barreling down the tracks. But sometimes you need to be that person. And I had a team leader who was always going into his level meetings and coming back with to-do items for his team. He was, yes, 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 absolutely, we'll go do that. And he'd come back and spread it out across the team. And that was contributing to burnout, poor quality, frustration, all those typical things we're all familiar with. And for him, the coaching moment was about realizing how to pick your battles. When it's appropriate to say no, to protect your team, to protect the integrity of the project, to protect himself and the reputation that he has as the leader of that team. And sometimes saying no was the right thing for that moment. And people would argue, but not always. And sometimes it would be, yes, wait, no. And we finally got him to a point where there was no yes or maybe or caveats or anything like that, or I can partially do it. It was like, no, not this time. And I felt that was so huge because his team started to bring out that trust factor, because now he's sharing knowledge with his peers of what the team is capable of and giving them the runway to make it happen.
Excellent. Excellent. Bob Kanter says, try reading The Power of a Positive No by William Ury. So thanks for that recommendation, Bob. Wendy, let's hear from you, ma'am. Tell us your favorite.
Okay. Well, I'm actually going to share. So I've only been officially coaching for about 2, maybe a year and a half now. So I've kind of always coached my clients along the way in my business. But
sure,
one of my coaching clients, he was going through this transition. He didn't really know it at first, but he had moved into a position within the agency where he was really primarily responsible for bringing in government contracts that were a large part of their business and everything. But this is kind of a little bit of a personal, like, oh, this was awesome kind of thing, where just through coaching and discussions, he ended up moving into a position that was really highlighting his underlying talents that had been sort of channeled into very technical roles and responsibilities, but really were now put into primarily a business development role. And he started asking me, how can I do what you're going down this path? How can I do that? And stuff. So I thought that was just really incredible, because you could see how these things that we do, they have impact for people. They help them, they unlock things for them. They help them see themselves more fully and to realize the possibilities for themselves and their own future. So that was just an awesome moment for me. I was so happy for him.
That's amazing, Wendy. And you highlight the one thing that I think coaches do so beautifully, and that is open up a new window of possibilities for people. I believe it was Tom Rath I saw. He is with Gallup Corporation, or he wrote the book, StrengthsFinder 2.0. And what he said in that book was, or in a conference that I heard of him talking about it, was that the gift of coaching is so powerful when we are able to open up and show someone something about themselves that they did not know, that opens up that whole world of possibilities. And so coaching is finally in vogue. And so it's time for, to have this where we start to develop this amazing potential that is inside of each and every person so that they can be more and do more and have more. So Cindy Butts, let's hear from you about a favorite.
Well, actually, you set me up. Perfect segue. Because one of my favorite stories is actually a really simple story. And sometimes as coaches, we notice and pay attention to things that someone else might not have noticed before. So that's perfect what you were just talking about. And recently, well, about 6 months ago, a gentleman joined an IT team. He was newer on the team. And one of the things that we uncovered as he kind of integrated into this team was that he loves short-term assignments that have a huge sense of urgency, like loves it. So he's like, bring it on. There's nothing that's really stressful. There's a project that starts on Monday. Here's your resources. Here's your team. It's due like Thursday at 6 a.m. And he's like, this is the best, right? So after we realized that he loves these short-term, he's not as interested in the really long-term projects. And then, so we're breaking those things down. But the short-term assignments, he gets so much energy. He gives his team so much energy. There's quality, Marcia, as well, right? So it's not just Fast and Furious. I was thinking about that. But it was really interesting when we noticed that pattern and we were able to say to him, this is a really interesting way for you to be able to lead in certain ways for your team and to provide momentum and value for your team. So he's kind of known as like he's got his Teflon armor, like he's just not stressed about much of anything and loves that like super sense of urgency. So anyways, it's fascinating because now he has this kind of different role that the whole team can benefit from.
Yeah, it's his superpower.
Yes.
They've tapped into his superpower and now he supercharges his team so that they can be more, do more, and have more, which is what it's all about, right? So, wow, you guys, I so appreciate you coming in today and sharing your expertise with us. And for those of you who are listening now or to the replay, will be linking you to each of them so that you can get in touch, and I encourage you to do so because these are very powerful coaches who have helped hundreds and hundreds of people. So I want you to reach out and talk to them. And so thank you guys. I'm so grateful that you would come and share with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda, for putting it together.
You bet. What a great time. So with that, I will let you go. Again, I'm Rhonda Boyle, your community leader of the SOAR online community. And so we are at SOAR.com. We have a cadre of professional coaches ready to help you with any challenge you may have, whether you're an IT professional, you work with a team, whether you need family coaching or you have a teenager. So we cover it from any area that you may have challenges. So anyway, we would invite you to join us at soar.com, and I'll put all of the details in the follow up. So with that, everyone, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you soon. Take
Bye
care.
all.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.